here we are today. We're launching a new project, obviously, called Ways of Listening. But it's been a couple of years that we've been talking about potentially working together, right?
I know. I remember seeing a BBC article about one of the Cities and Memory projects that you instigated. And I couldn't believe what I was reading. It really resonated with me. And I thought, wow, this is just so in line with the mission of the Evelyn Glennie Foundation, which is to teach the world to listen. So I remember taking the chance to reach out to you, and you very kindly, got in touch, and we started our conversation and just found that, we're so passionate about listening, and the work that you have done is just extraordinary. And I think, it's this idea that listening is such a powerful tool for people to tell their stories, in any which way they want. And I think this project, Ways of Listening, is inviting people and opening up this possibility to say, well, what does listening mean to you? And, the fact that we have an open landscape, I suppose, for people to express themselves is just fantastic. And it's a global project, and we have to be listening globally. Our world is it's in a difficult place at the moment, and I think listening is one of the things that we have to take responsibility for.
Yeah, I think it feels to me like a really natural collaboration. I think there's so much between what I've tried to do with Cities of Memory over the last 10 years and what the Evelyn Glennie Foundation is doing. There's so much natural stuff there that we've got in common that it was only a matter of time until we came up with the idea that would kind of be the one that we could work on together. And
I know.
And that's where we get to with Ways of Listening.
I know, and it's really interesting how it gives us the opportunity as well to think, well, what is listening in the first place? What is it? What does it involve? And we often think, well, we have to relate listening to a sound, that we have to hear well in order to listen well. And it's that same thing again where, hearing can be measured, but listening can't. That is an experience. And, you can see hearing through an audiograph or whatever, but listening is measured through connection and experience and empathy and patience and so much more. And I think also, I find it interesting, sometimes when I switch on the news in the morning, almost every morning there is something to do with listening. It could be someone being interviewed and saying, well, I didn't feel listened to, or, well, if only they had listened. Well, I wish listening was much more, part of our story, or oh, gee, I simply don't feel listened to, and it goes on and on and on, and that word listen crops up time and time and time again, and I think it's almost the glue to every kind of disjointed situation we have in our lives, whether it's domestically or in work or in our communities or whatever, listening is, I think, the resonance of humanity, quite frankly.
And I mean, I guess thinking about listening, with this project, this is obviously very focused on listening, but what is it about creativity and listening that makes them naturally fit together and where one enhances the other, do you think?
Yeah, I think, it's I find it interesting in that when you're thinking about listening and any form of creativity, there's that aspect of being in no man's land, where you're not quite sure which direction you're going to go, and then you sort of play around, almost improvising, and you're being curious and you're experimenting and you're asking questions. Well, what if I did this, or I tried that, or I used that colour, or I played that note, or I used that sound, or I did a squiggly line, or whatever, and that is part of listening. It's that journey of curiosity. And I find that so interesting as a musician. I find it interesting as an improviser. I find it interesting when I come across an instrument I've never come across before. And, there is this listening to yourself, this machine, and then how you relate then to that object or situation or person. So, we're creative 24 hours a day, actually, when you think about it. but somehow we dissect things, now I'm going to be creative, or now I'm going to listen, or now I'm going to cook, or now I'm going to practice, or whatever. But actually, when we think about everything we do, it's sort of, they're so intertwined.
Relating to that, that's a really interesting idea of complete creativity, for want of a better phrase.
Yeah.
And I find that really interesting from my point of view of doing Cities of Memory over the last 10 years. All of the projects have been about sound for obvious reasons.
Yes.
They've been about field recording, they've been about whether you're recording on a mobile phone or on a high-end recording device, or they've been about musical composition or sound art. This is the first time we've done a project where it's multidisciplinary, it's completely open to anyone to respond, whether they want to respond with a pencil and paper, with some writing, with a poem, with a photograph, a drawing, a piece of video, whatever it might be. And to me that's so exciting to be able to open up what I do to basically anybody, to any kind of creative response. So that's what I'm excited about.
Absolutely. And as you were listening to those things, I was thinking, well, it could be a fashion designer, thinking about listening. It could be a hairstyle, it could be makeup, it could be anything, it could be how you paint your nails, or, it's just any kind of, or a meal that someone might cook, I don't know. So yes, absolutely, I think that this project belongs to everybody, and we're listening. We really want to know people's stories, and also it's a project that can be ongoing. It's a project that people could take themselves and almost have ownership of it. They could say, right, in our school, we're going to have a year of listening and map out what does that look like through our creative arts, and it could be through drama, movement, it just any kind of expression, and we're all able to be expressive in our own ways, and we have to listen.
And it brings together playfulness but also seriousness, right? Because on the one hand you've got, well, what medium am I going to choose to express myself? How am I going to do this? Let's be playful about the creative side of things, but we're also using that creativity as an expression of quite a serious conversation. So, for some of the projects that I've run, they've used sound as a lens to talk about things like human migration or climate change or urban sustainability, all very serious subjects. But by using sound to do that, you put a different lens onto the conversation, you approach it from a different angle, and you allow people to think about it differently. So I'm hoping that this project can also not just help people to think about listening differently, but maybe actually for many people to think about it for the first time.
Completely, absolutely, and I think it's such a shared project. I mean, can you imagine a 5-year-old with an 85-year-old, thinking and asking that question together, and making that connection? It's just I think a very powerful project, and we can't underestimate that word listening, and I think this project will really ignite, I think, something bigger than perhaps we're even seeing right now. This is an important project, and certainly from the Foundation's perspective, really, I'm just beyond excited. I really am very excited by this.
And I guess if we think about the central question, we are asking people to give creative responses to the question, what does listening mean to you? So, I mean, I have to ask you, off the top, your first thoughts on what does listening mean to you from your perspective?
Yes, I mean, I think the main thing is connection. That's what listening means to me, is connection. I think we, as I mentioned earlier, we imagine, listening has to be related to a sound, but listening is resonance, and listening is something that we can't just measure from a kind of human perspective, because if that's the case, there's still sound lingering around the room that we won't be able to pick up. And I think, there's a wonderful singing bowl under the marimba over there, and when you stand in that bowl, you will literally feel the resonance far, far longer than what the ear will pick up. And that's really interesting, because when you watch someone in that bowl experiencing that sensation, you could either say, oh, well, I don't hear it anymore, and then you do something else. But when you're waiting with that person, the presence and just the weight of the experience, then becomes quite magical. So, we just have to decide, well, do we want to be part of that or not? So it's a decision that we make ourselves at the time. So I think that connection goes beyond what we hear, and we know that hearing gets old, but listening doesn't. Listening is there for us all forevermore.
I suppose, like from my point of view, you talk about connection, and to me that's very related to openness, which I think is one of the key things I think about when I think about listening, is this idea of openness to the world, openness to other people, openness to the environment, openness to the things that are going on around you. I think listening and openness are so intrinsically connected, and openness is really important to everything that I've tried to do with Cities and Memory. And I suppose the other thing is just this idea of attention.
Yes.
This idea of what is the attention that you pay to the world, and through listening you can pay a different kind of attention, a closer and more engaged attention with the world around you. It's not just about sound. So that's kind of, I guess, my take on it.
I think sorry to butt in there. I think, also from what you've just said, is that kind of gives all of us as individuals the opportunity to be really quite honest with ourselves. When we give ourselves that time and space to listen to our own thoughts even, that's a really necessary and precious thing that we must allow to just happen. We must protect that time and that opportunity to listen to ourselves. One question that I'm often asked is, who are your inspirations? And it's far too big-headed to say, well, actually myself. But do you know what I mean? But by that I mean you have to listen to yourself in order to know what is resonating inside, and to acknowledge that, positive or negative, it doesn't matter. But you have to feel that sort of connection and appreciation towards yourself before you can begin to listen to something else, so that's the connection. It's almost like putting your own life mask on first before you help someone else. So it sounds a bit selfish, but yeah, do you know what I mean?
I do. I mean, I think it's a lovely idea, the idea that we can all find that necessary inspiration that we need for life within ourselves, if only we actually kind of listen to ourselves.
If we listened, yeah.
That we all have it inside us.
Completely.
I guess just to conclude, I need to ask you, what do we hope to get out of this project? From your point of view, with ways of listening, what's the ultimate goal? Where do you see this going?
Well, I think that I would love to see a hugely varied response to that question. I'd love to see it really spreading internationally. I'd love for us to be able then to look at the responses and actually think, well, how can we use these responses? What are the connections within those responses? Is there a way that we see, this would be really important for our schools to recognise, or for our care homes, or our communities, or our homes, are there responses there that can shift our situation for the better? Are there responses there whereby we think, that would be fantastic to link that with that, maybe something new can arise? I think it's a fact that if we can make this project ongoing, if we can find a way to keep this question relevant, I think that would mean a lot. Yeah,
I think it's that idea of a shared conversation, isn't it? It's like, we've got one question sitting at the heart of everything, and it's, well, how does a field recorder respond to this? How does a sound artist respond to this? How does a painter, a videographer, a dancer, a poet respond to it? But also, to your point, how do schools or hospitals or other communities, such as, for example, the deaf community, how do all these different communities respond to that question? And what are the shared points within that where we can come to a collective better understanding of what it means to listen?
Completely, and redefine what listening means, actually. I mean, I remember going into a prison, and I brought along some very resonant instruments, and what was interesting was that all of the ladies from this prison had, gone in and out of this particular space, this wonderful, it was actually a ballroom really within the prison, but they'd never listened to the room, which is very interesting. So we had this opportunity to listen to the room, to be placed in different parts of the room, and by the end of our time together, what they wanted, they expressed that they would really, really like to have their own space where they could listen, their own space where they could have small instruments that they could experiment with, they could use with their voice, but a space where they could really listen, and a space where their stories were also listened to, where they could express themselves creatively and for that to be listened to. And it's very interesting seeing that emerge, and I think it was just a powerful, powerful afternoon of just real kind of connection, exchange, that pace, the listening pace that happened. You couldn't, try to force anything, you had to listen to the people first before you could determine what on earth you were going to do, and that's a wonderful situation to be in, because it's not prescriptive, it's simply listening, and that's the medicine, and then how we take it, how we share it, and how it affects us. That's what we need to be listening to.
So we're just going to take that and share it around the world.
Completely.